Hello there, my friend. Thanks so much for taking a minute to watch this interview with my new friend, Chris Edmonds. Chris is the author of a brand new book called The Culture Engine, which I absolutely love, and we'll talk about that in a minute. He's been doing leadership development work for about 25 years now. After a 15-year career, in different leadership positions, he went into the consulting work, and he's been doing that for a long time. He's worked with the Ken Blanchard companies. And his new book, The Culture Engine, is all about what we can do to make cultural change something that is very palpable, it's visceral, and it's quantifiable instead of kind of going about it willy-nilly. And so let's welcome Chris to the interview. Thanks so much for being with me, Chris.
Matt, appreciate your time and your enthusiasm for this project. It's very cool.
I'm very enthused. Before we get into, I think there's a lot that you have to share with the audience that could be very helpful for running any type of or leading any type of team or running an organization, whether it's a 2 or 3 person team all the way up to a 30,000 plus company, publicly traded company. I think what you have to offer is very, very important. So I want to ask you questions that I think will help the listener to run a team better, lead a team better. But before we do that, I think it'd be nice to just help them get to know you a little bit. Would you mind sharing, what are the core values that kind of drive your work, your personal core values?
I will, and it's a key part of the culture piece. So it's a perfect segue to open into that. And it's been years. It's been probably 25 years since I first put my values into formal writing and sharing them with my lovely bride and family members and friends, and I still periodically do that to make sure that either I haven't evolved, maybe, which sometimes occurs, but there's also the idea around how am I behaving according to those. So my values, there's 4 of them. It's integrity, it's learning, it's joy, and it's perfection. And the integrity piece is huge for me. For me, the idea of if I make a commitment to do X or Y or Z, then I'm actually making a promise, and I have to have commitment to that commitment. And if something comes up and I'm unable to do that, if I'm unable to meet that commitment, then I'm going to come back and say, Matt, sorry, here's what's happened, here's the plan, is that okay? Because stuff always happens. But keeping your word and kind of being true to yourself and to the promises you make is vitally important for me. Learning, I'm constantly learning, and you and I just spoke about the learning process of getting a book published and all the various and sundry curveballs and variables there, and I thought, I know nothing about this. I'm going to learn a whole bunch, and I need to be obvious when I don't know what I'm doing and ask questions. And so I have no fear whatsoever to say I don't know what I'm doing if I don't. The joy piece is an interesting one. I've had some. All of us have challenges, throughout our careers, be it family, be it work life, what have you. But I had a heart attack in December of '93, and I was 41 years old, and it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of say, so you happy with the direction you've been going? You're alive now. Now you're a heart patient, and you're going to have to be a heart patient for the rest of your life. Is there stuff you want to change? And there was stuff I changed. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of realize if stuff isn't fun, if stuff is anxiety-ridden, maybe I can learn something from that. But for the most part, there's a lot of really fun stuff, and I can provide joy to others. I kind of rather do that where I can. And so I have a very twisted mind, and I think I'm hilarious. But I'd rather be around happy people, positive people, and kind of pursue that. And so it's a pretty intentional piece. And the perfection thing can get in the way. Oh my God, can it get in the way? But again, it goes to somewhat kind of not a surprise. It's driven from that integrity piece. So I want to have it meet your standards, meet your needs, maybe even wow you a little bit, kind of on time, under budget. But I can go back and I can edit stuff for hours, and longer than maybe it took for me to write it, because I want to make sure that it's communicating the ideas clearly in an actionable fashion and whatnot. So that is definitely a value of mine, and it can get in the way. It can get in the way.
I imagine that value comes into play. You're also a part-time rock star.
Yeah.
I know. So you jam out. You still have the rock star hair a little bit.
Yeah.
Does the perfection value come into play there in your rock star alter ego life?
Oh my God! And bands are very interesting, and so we do I'm in a country rock band now. We do a lot of classic rocks. It's basically rockers, but do country stuff. It's a very vocal driven band, and when I joined the band here in Denver 7 years ago, the core three of us spent 6 months straight learning vocals. And I'd never spent that much time on vocal work. We didn't get a drummer. We didn't find a bass player. We just sat around a piano and sang and sang and sang and sang and sang. And I don't read music, so the perfectionist in me meant I had to memorize it. I had to learn it. I had to hear it. And so yesterday, for example, we were at Copper Mountain playing for contestants of the Country Showdown, which was really cool. So it's state contestants, and they got a chance to do their thing. We had to learn their songs, kind of be the background thing. And then we did a half hour of our music while the judges flipped coins, or whatever judges do. And the crowd was so good that we announced the winners, and they asked for another hour from us. So it was just, we threw out songs, and we've got such a wonderful experience together that it was no set list, no plans. What do we want to do? It was awesome. It was great. In the misty rain of the Rocky Mountains at Copper Mountain, but it was really fun. So it's a wonderful outlet. No money in it whatsoever.
Excellent. Well, the first thing I wanted to ask you about your book. So, just to give the viewers, I know you will go into much more detail about this, but where I think this can be so powerful is, anybody that listens to me for more than 30 seconds knows that, there's what I propose is this very simple idea that if we focus on serving and caring for the people that are on our teams over the long term, we're going to have much better success than if we're focused on short-term goals like profit and revenues and expenses and all those types of things. And you touch on that as well in your book. But what I think is so valuable about your book is that you give a framework that to me is somewhat unique. I've seen different variations of this, but yours is just so concrete and so well laid out. And what you call it is an organizational constitution.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of having values that are very well articulated that guide behaviors and guide decisions, but then also having behaviors that are very well articulated that allow you to very easily measure whether the values are being lived both by the leaders and by the people that those leaders are leading. Could you just maybe go into a little bit more detail about why do you think this is so important? Why should an organization have an organizational constitution?
It's a critical piece, and what I found in my 15 years of consulting around culture change was that the closer I could get leaders to realizing that there's performance expectations and there's black and white metrics and there's dashboards everywhere, they keep so close track on those classic kind of hard numbers, and that is the exclusive thing that they often focus upon. And I said, but your teams are terrible to live on. They're either lifeless or they're dull or they're frustrating and they're anxiety-ridden. And so how do we actually craft? All of us have had great bosses. And those great bosses actually created an environment where we were trusted, we were honored, we were respected, and we busted our behinds to meet those performance commitments. And so it's like, which came first? You almost don't care, but because you need both. And so the big idea that actually began to be the lever to help some of these leaders move their organizations was, let's make values as black and white and as measurable as your performance standards, and then let's hold people accountable for both. And then the second piece was, and it very much is grounded upon the servant leadership idea, which is that leaders that choose to take a 10-member team through this, 30,000-member global organization through this are going to be in the spotlight a lot. They're going to be carefully scrutinized, because as soon as you put a value out there and you put some behaviors around it, then the scrutiny is going to come on you as a leader very quickly and very deeply. And I tell leaders all the time, if you start this thing, you'll never be able to run a yellow light in this town again. Because it's not like the values are in place at home or they're in place at work and then they're different elsewhere. They're kind of the values that you embrace and the principles that guide you. So the Constitution piece is about clear purpose. Is there a reason for being that's actually compelling and inspiring for people? separate from making money, which is very sadly, often it's the only message that people get. Team members, frontline team members will say, you know, we make cars, we make sandwiches, we make espresso, and we make money. And it's like, well, what do we do for customers? How do we make customers' lives better, easier? What's our service to them? So that purpose statement is not a happenstance, not a casual kind of a statement. It needs to be pretty intentional. The second piece of an organizational constitution are the values and behaviors, and we'll speak a little bit more about how do you get values defined in terms that are measurable, that are the kinds of things that you actually want people to be doing, because that's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of coaching, and it's a different way of asking people to behave. So there's some really interesting dynamics there, but we're not asking people to change their attitudes. We're asking them to align to some desired behaviors. The last two pieces of an organizational constitution are the pieces that are mostly in place, the strategies and goals. And so most organizations do a reasonable job of some kind of strategic planning and some kind of performance metrics for a team or an organization. So those plug in really nicely. The pieces that are different and the pieces that will take the most time are the purpose statement and then the values and the behaviors.
I noticed you were mentioning that you know, once a leader begins on this journey, they're not going to be able to run a yellow light, or definitely not a red light in town anymore. You know, and chapter 2 of your book is actually entitled "It Starts with You," and so you kind of start off with going through this process just on your own, you know, and clarifying purpose. Could you maybe give a little bit of guidance to you know, somebody that might be checking this out and just say, well, what's a simple way that I can go through and kind of find, you know, what's the real purpose for what I'm doing, other than, you know, going to work to make money on a personal level?
It's a great question, and it's a hugely important question, because the whole idea of servant leadership is often perceived as either religious connotation or it's the inmates running the prison. You know, there's kind of that interesting pendulum of, and it's not seen as, you know, as a leader, this is my choice. And so what I'm going to craft is the same kind of a great, comfortable but high-performing team environment where people trust each other. What a surprise. People cooperate to get stuff done. They share information. They share resources. We get it done faster. It's way more fun. But the reality is that we have sustainable performance that is very easy for folks to spot. And so from a personal standpoint, one of the reasons why that chapter kind of starts with it begins with you, is this is going to be extremely demanding for leaders who may never have been in a position in an organization to pay as much attention to citizenship and to validation and to people being nice. They've never had to do that before. All they've been asked to look at is how many widgets, how many catalogs, how many cars, how many sandwiches, how many cups of coffee, and it's an interesting shift to move from I can manage stuff. There's a wonderful, wonderful quote from one of my coaching clients who basically, after 2 years, this is an old school thinker, and chipping away at that philosophy was one we both worked at quite a bit. And 2 years in, he said, I had an epiphany this week. And I said, okay, I wondered what that noise was, you know, 7 states away. But he said, I used to see my job as managing people's performance and processes, and now I see my job as managing people's energy. And I said, now let's talk about how you're going to do that, because that's what servant leadership is about. And it's about you accepting that responsibility, but then you have to behave different. You have to actually pay more attention to how people interact with each other. How do they refer to each other? How do they refer to customers? And it's different. And it's going to be, you're going to be a learner at it for a while. And you're going to run a yellow light, or you're going to bump somebody, you know, through the 10 items or only grocery line with 12 items, and someone's going to go, aha, I knew Chris didn't fully believe this thing. It's wild where people go. And so you really have to kind of be firm, kind of get the backbone up, and be resolute to say, this is worth the change. This is worth the pushback I'm going to get. And it's worth the extra effort because I'm actually going to be able to back off on the time and energy on production, and I can increase the time and energy on relationships and networking and creating an environment that's nice and treats people with dignity and respect. It's way more fun, but it's different, and it's a demand. It's going to put pressure on you. You may end up managing your family different, behaving differently, and outside the workplace as well, because this all of a sudden starts to align and starts to make sense.
Now you had mentioned a moment ago, how we have to really commit to just seeing, well, this is realizing that this is worth it. And in your book, you gave some great examples of how worth it this is in terms of, obviously if an organization doesn't perform financially, there won't be anybody to lead and anybody to serve. But your experience has been that when leaders really create a culture like the one you're talking about, where people take care of each other, where they're how they treat each other is a very important, measurable, something that they're measured on and evaluated on.
Yeah.
That actually drastically improves the financial performance. Can you just run through a little bit, maybe if there's a skeptic here that's saying, I don't want to create a kumbaya culture like this, or nice to each other. How is this worth it to me?
I'll use a wonderful example of a gentleman named Mark Dieterding, who's now a leadership consultant, a servant leadership consultant and coach out of central Minnesota. And he was one of our earliest culture clients, and he was in a catalog plant. He was the plant manager there, the GM there, and they reached out to us for leadership development because they thought their supervisors needed fixing. And the more I said, let's dig in and see kind of what you're facing here, and kind of turned on all the lights and showed the corners, and kind of there's more than dust bunnies in the corners, There's a lack of trust, there's a lack of respect, and we kind of work on that first. And so they were part of a 5-plant system in a small company, and theirs was the lowest engagement of any of the other plants. So the parent company said, you need to go fix this. Didn't really have a system for how, didn't have suggestions for how, but you need to go invest in this and fix this trust problem, which is very interesting. That's an interesting kind of a go out and fix it kind of an idea. So blessed as all get out that they came to us. And once we got them into this organizational constitution, having leadership model this, having the employees begin rating their leaders in a formal assessment, an employee, what they called a community assessment, to 6 months after they announced the organizational constitution with values and behaviors, every leader, every supervisor, every manager, every leader got rated by their direct reports on the degree to which that they modeled these 22, 23 behaviors. I said their list was too long, and they said, nope, it's fine. And they were right. Within 12 months, they had their engagement score had jumped from 30% to 65%. It's a Hewitt survey, so it was basically the Gallup Q12. Huge jump, biggest in the system. More importantly, customer service rankings went up 40%, and profits went up 35% in 12 months, which meant that the way things had been operating, they were actually making money because they were still open. And as they began to embrace this values-based, we're going to create an environment that's inspiring for everybody, then all of a sudden people showed up more, they solved problems more quickly, they had ideas about new markets, about changing product lines so they could do something different. Pretty remarkable. 12 months. Now, I don't promise 12-month turnarounds like that. They were totally ready. But typically we see very significant gains in 18 months to 24 months. So it's a long view. It's not a 2-day training.
Right, but those gains that you see over 18 or 24 months, they're sustainable. It's not like some financial restructuring that creates a short-term hit on the balance sheet and makes you look great for a couple quarters, and then you say, oh, whoops, that's not going to last, right?
Yeah, it falls back into place. Yeah, very true.
Now, where I think where this organizational constitution, where I think it's so valuable, is that I think there's just about everybody that's in a leadership position is aware that there need to be values that guide decision making and guide behaviors on a team.
Yep.
And what I notice, and I'm sure, well, I know you've noticed, as you mentioned in your book, but I've noticed that there are many organizations that they learn about this and they say, okay, well, let's create some values, but maybe they don't really live it, and they're definitely not measured. They just kind of become like this document that's in the leader's office or something like that, and nobody really knows what the values are. They might know one or two. So what you do is you take it to the point where not only are values communicated to the point where, everybody knows what the values are, but you had mentioned this company, they had 20-some behaviors. So what you do is you take the values, and let's say, I know you like to limit values to like the top 5 to make sure it's really clear.
Exactly.
Yeah, but then what you're doing with the organizational constitution and what the companies that you've helped do this, what they're doing is they're saying, okay, well, what are 2, 3, 4 behaviors that you would see if somebody was living this value? So can you talk a little bit about, how does somebody go through that? How do they create values that, 1, they're going to live, and then 2, how do they define the behaviors that make it very easy to measure whether a leader or somebody on the team is actually living those values?
Exactly. Great question. And where we actually get leaders to start is to go out and find your benchmark stars, because there's already great values-led players acting in your organization, and of course sometimes they're the ones that get all the work thrown at them because they're great performers, they don't complain, they do their best, but you've got very good practices that exist. So the first thing I tell leaders to do is go do a quick kind of survey of that. Go look to see who are your great star, fabulous, you'd love to clone them performers, and it's not what they do from a skill side. Obviously that's important. It's what they do from a value side. How do they behave so that people see them as cooperative team members that are in service to their peers as well as to customers? And so start with that. And that might bring you 4, 5, 10 kinds of behaviors. The other thing that I confess I do is I keep a list of past clients. So I've got 40 different clients and different behaviors, and as you might guess, there's some common values that organizations will embrace, and integrity is a value that almost every organization I've worked with has. Another one did honesty, another one did excellence. I've seen companies do learning. So I've got some samples of behaviors from different industries that people will look at it and go, oh, that's a good one. That would be perfect for us. Or that's something that George does, and George is great, so that's kind of a better term or reference to what George does, so let's kind of grab that. But you're right, I want to have them look at 4 or 5 values, not more than that, and 3 preferred behaviors. So you're getting really bang for the buck behaviors. And again, the initial thrust is, yes, you ask for employee feedback on these behaviors. Employees may not quite know what you're looking for, right, because they've not lived in an environment like that either. But they're kind of enthused that the leaders are going to put themselves up for the target practice first, So there's a wonderful kind of, this is our working draft, so we're going to start with this. The intent is getting some feedback 6 months after it, having a formal all-employee survey that says, give the leaders feedback on the degree to which, the extent to which you see them modeling these behaviors. There's some very interesting things once you get to the behavioral view and you start doing assessment. I want to really quick for a second give an example of a behavioralized value, and that may be helpful. And again, integrity is a very, very popular value, and we get all kinds of behaviors that first get thrown in. And part of the challenge you have to deal with is you don't want attitudinal things, because they're not observable, they're not measurable. You would love aligned attitudes, but we can't go there. So let's go to behaviors. So one of the behaviors I love is do what you say you're going to do. Flat out do what you say you're going to do. I've had folks kind of look at the keep your promises, but they love the piece of going back and kind of saying, if this is going to be missed, here's what I'm planning on, here's what I just learned, this isn't great. But it's kind of the dialogue more than it is just, this promise is impossible to keep, so I'm just not going to say anything. No one will notice. Oh, yeah, they'll notice. So by stating integrity in a term that says, I do what I say I'm going to do, 6 months later, can you rate me on my actions, my plans, my decisions over the past 6 months on a 1 through 6 scale? 1 being no, I don't agree at all, and I strongly agree on the 6 side. You're going to get absolute confident perceptions. And these are your first customers. These are the employees you're trying to inspire. And so as you might imagine, if you've got a list of 15, maybe 20, okay, 3. One of my clients had 50 behaviors, and they were bound and determined, and it worked very well. Their assessment, their community assessment was almost 130 questions. But everybody did it, and it was great data. It was very actionable data, and I thought, oh my God, you're going to survey people out. But they knew that they had a ways to go, and they wanted to craft a really solid foundation. The piece that gets interesting is you begin to try to put accountability around values the same way you might around production, performance, market share, sales goals, what have you, is you got to have black and white trusted data. So these valued behaviors will work for that. But if I'm a manager, if I'm a director, and I see some of these behaviors and I realize I don't really act that way today, I might choose to leave. And the reality is that's okay. If I leave and I go take my experience, skills, what have you, somewhere else, but you're able to put someone in who will embrace those valued behaviors and align and coach to those behaviors, you're actually going to have an organization that performs better. Can old school thinkers, folks who've never had to deal with these kinds of expectations, change and embrace it? Absolutely, because they've never been asked to do it before. So you got to be careful about making assumptions. Oh, Chris is never going to buy this. He's going to be an idiot. He's going to blow it in the first week. You never know. You never know. People may absolutely embrace it because you've changed the rules. You've crafted a different path, and it may be much more close to my behaviors, my own personal values, and I was more stressed before because I was behaving in ways that were inconsistent. It's very interesting.
Incredibly interesting. And just, for those of you checking this video out, if you want to go further with this, Chris's book is fantastic and goes into great detail about, how you can start implementing this. And, one of the chapters on you're going to face resistance, right? How do you deal with the resistance? How do you start measuring these things in ways that get people on board and get them engaged? Or in the case like you mentioned, where somebody just doesn't feel that they're aligned with the values, they leave, and that's okay. But before we wrap up, Chris, I thought it'd be great if you could just leave if you could leave a message, very like a Twitter type thing, just very simple message that what defines Chris Edmonds and his work. What would that be? What would you like to leave people with?
Boy, what a great question. I'm hopeful that the way I behave meets people's expectations, that I do keep my promises, that people feel like this was a pleasant, positive experience, even if I'm trying to, sell them a book or sell them a training solution or get them to buy our band for an evening dance kind of a thing, that they feel like they've gotten value, they feel like they've gotten kindness, and God forbid they've had some joy as well. More than 140 characters.
That's pretty close. I think if you typed it shorthand, you could probably fit that in there. 140 characters. Just to let you know, if you want to check his book out, Chris Edmonds. The book is called The Culture Engine. It's available for pre-order now, anywhere books are sold. It comes out where you can actually have it in your hands on September 29th. So it's right around the corner. Chris, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I think that was valuable for me, and I'm hoping that it's valuable for everybody who takes the moment to watch this. So thanks so much for taking the time to be with me.
Absolutely. So appreciate it. As you can tell, I'm reasonably excited about the concepts and excited about the changes that leaders can make. Folks can go to thecultureengine.com for more info and a free chapter and more information there as well.
Great. Thanks again. And thank you, everyone, for taking a moment to watch this video. I'm really glad that you did, and I would imagine that you are too. I look forward to serving you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks, man.